today, so I'm sorry to be boringly predictable to you. But Britain, of course, did not enter the euro, and there is currently to my mind, fascinating piece of historical revisionism going on among those people in Britain who said we should have joined, and are still trying to persuade the Great Republic that they were right at a time when circumstances would appear to be proving the opposite. That having been said, those of us who are generally deemed to be Eurosceptics in the UK, my organisation of the Henry Jackson Society has a very wide range of opinions on this matter, and I'm, as I said, one end of that. But those of us who take the position I have taken should always stress, so I do now, that in no way do we want the Eurozone to fail, and in no way would we or are we any more serious regarding this with any type of glee. Being proved right is no fun at all when Armageddon is on the other side of being proved right. It is no fun at all for a political view to be corroborated at the expense of huge numbers of people's livelihoods, of civil unrest, of political upheaval, and so on. So even as a Eurosceptic, I hope very much that the Eurozone is able to come through this crisis and succeed through it. I think it's important because sometimes people are more inclined to be proved right than to seek peace. Anyhow, I want to make a very short number of points on this matter. The first is this. The Chair mentioned at the outset that one of the objectives of the European Union, Eurozone, I might say, was to make war between nation states in Europe less likely. And I think it's important to get this right. First of all, one of the reasons why there is more Euroscepticism in Britain than elsewhere is precisely because there is a feeling in Britain that we don't have exactly the same problem as happened on the continent, and therefore we may feel that we are apart from that. I think there's a perfectly good argument for saying so. But I think also there is a serious misunderstanding at the heart of that view of the virtue of integration, which is, among other things, to mistake what causes war. War may have been, after Westphalia, primarily something that occurred between nation states, but before that, Europe was riven by wars of religion, and I think that a very short view of history has been extrapolated out in Europe for a long view of history, and I think some of the wrong lessons have been taken. I think that there is a serious problem, and it's something which the EU, with Britain in it, the Eurozone without us in it, has to consider, which is the extent to which this has gone beyond economics, and the extent to which what is happening is driven solely by ideology. I think ideology is a very good thing in some ways, exceedingly bad thing in others. I think it's exceedingly bad when it trumps common sense in economics. And I think that you see one example of that among many, many others one could list, with Greek entry into the euro, when Greece was demonstrably cooking its books, as we would say in Britain. Why did people not want to see this? Because this was not about economics, this was about ideology. It's about trying to draw as wide a number of people into a fiscal union as possible, and I think we are seeing very bad results indeed from that trumping of ideology. But I wanted to cite a even more serious concern, which I think needs to be addressed, which is the issue of democratic legitimacy, which has already come up. If you look around the world in 2011, it was an extraordinarily year for democratic spread across North Africa. It was an extraordinary year for democratic voices to speak up across the Middle East. It was an exceedingly bad year for democracy in Europe. If even a couple of years before you had said that there would be a year very soon where democracy failed so badly that in a country like Italy it would be necessary to go around the democratic process and put in a bureaucrat to sort out the economy, I think that people would have thought you were dreaming. But exactly that situation came along and we accepted it as if it wasn't too much of a problem. I think that sometimes things happen in politics which you don't realize at the time are very significant and appear to have been a minor bump, and it's only sometime later that you realize it was indeed a very aggressive one. And I think that that is an example of it. But the second issue is the issue of representation generally in the EU and across the continent. I think that as a proponent of democratic politics, as a defender of it, as an advocate of it, and an advocate for spreading democratic politics around the world, the EU currently is an exceedingly bad exemplar of these traits. And I say that again with no glee. The EU has shown itself to be, if not incapable, then certainly an institution that finds it exceedingly hard to back up on mistakes. It's an institution that finds it extremely hard not to inevitably spread out, to inevitably grow, and to metastasize. I would say that this moment in the EU, and the Eurozone crisis in particular, should be one which, if the EU is to survive, it will have to seriously address some of these issues. It will have to address the issue of democratic legitimacy. It cannot, after this era, be acceptable that a foreign minister, for instance, is appointed in a closed group by unelected officials, and that the foreign minister in question is somebody that nobody's heard of and nobody's ever voted for. I'm referring to my lamentable countryman, Catherine Ashton, somebody who had never been through the democratic process in my country, but somehow is now called the European foreign minister. I think this is an issue that should be of serious democratic concern. And I hope I would say that even if I agreed with her politics, which I don't. But just finally, mention, of course, being busy, George's own role in this. I think there are many, having been rather down on it, but I think there are many things which membership of the EU can bring many advantages, and particularly that it can provide a direction of travel to countries like Georgia that wish to be part of such a zone and such a union. But I would add one caveat, which is that if Georgia is to move in this direction, as I would hope, generally speaking, it does, that it does so in a position which it can itself be constructive within. What I mean by that is, it could be, you could foresee a situation in which Georgia, with all of the, frankly, miracles that have occurred in your economic system in recent years, in your free market system, it is perfectly foreseeable that if you were to become involved in, become a member of the EU, much of that would reverse, because much of the liberalization of your markets would be backward, much of the regulation that would come in would hamper, not help that growth. I hope that there are things which can be done, which Georgia could be actively a part of and actively able to help Europe in. I said to one of my colleagues from Britain last night, if it were in my gift, I would give Georgia our EU membership, and you can have it. But in fact, what I would rather see is a number of states, Britain included, which work within the EU and work to reform it and precisely to sort out some of the democratic deficit which has existed there in recent years. But, and I say as the final point, I see very little likelihood of it succeeding because one of the remarkable things that has been coming from Brussels in recent weeks is, it seems to me, no lessening whatsoever of the frankly self-righteous tones in which Brussels speak. If my house were on fire and I had set light to it myself, I would like to think that I would speak with a degree more humility in telling other people about firefighting procedures. But I don't hear that, and as I say, it would be unlikely it could get much worse than this. So, as T.S. Eliot said, humility is endless, but it would be lovely to see it start somewhere, and that somewhere is